It was just after 6 in the evening when Luca pulled into the nearly deserted parking lot of a worn-down grocery store on the outskirts of town. His old car coughed once before settling into silence, much like the thoughts swirling in his head. Luca, a struggling single father from Naples who had moved to the States for a better life, was now staring at the cracked windshield and wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. His job at the shipping warehouse had vanished overnight in a round of layoffs, and with it, his already fragile sense of stability. He glanced in the rearview mirror at the crumpled $5 bill tucked into the visor, the last of what he had after paying rent. His 7-year-old son, Matteo, was back in their small apartment waiting for dinner that might not come. Luca had told him he'd bring something home, but all he had was a few coins and that wrinkled note. He hated lying to Matteo, but even worse was the fear of not knowing when things would get better. As Luca stepped out into the cool evening air, the quiet buzz of fluorescent lights flickered above the store entrance. He moved with the weary gait of a man who'd spent too many nights tossing in bed, running numbers that never added up. But just as he reached for a shopping cart, a faint voice cut through the air, soft, hesitant. "Excuse me, sir, do you have anything to eat?" Luca turned toward the voice. Near the side of the building, half hidden by the shadows, sat a woman with 3 children close by. The woman's name was Anika, and though her accent hinted at her Eastern European roots, the desperation in her eyes needed no translation. Her jacket was threadbare, and her kids huddled against her as if trying to block out both the wind and the hunger. The youngest child, barely 5, looked up at Luca with wide brown eyes and repeated softly, "Just something small, please." Luca froze. He looked down at the money in his hand, then back at the children. He wasn't doing much better himself. But as he met Anika's gaze, tired, proud, and somehow still gentle, he felt something shift inside him. He knew this look. It was the same one he had when trying to stay strong for Matteo. "I'm sorry," Anika said quickly, as if ashamed to even ask. "We've been here all day. I don't want your money. Just food. Anything." Luca swallowed hard. His first instinct was to walk away, to tell himself it wasn't his problem. But that wasn't who he was. Not then. Not now. "What's your name?" he asked quietly, crouching to the children's level. "Anika," she said. "And these are my children, Sasha, Ilya, and Mila. I'm Luca. I have a son too. Matteo. He's waiting for me to bring him something." Anika offered a faint smile. "Then you understand." He did. More than he wanted to admit. Without saying anything more, Luca turned and went inside. The store was dim, its shelves far from full. He scanned prices carefully, selecting a loaf of bread, a jar of hazelnut spread, a carton of milk, and a few bananas. At the register, he calculated every item in his head, afraid to go over. The total came to just under $5. Enough. Barely. Back outside, he returned to the small family on the sidewalk. Anika stood quickly, surprised. "You really didn't have to." "I did," Luca said simply, handing her the bag. "We're not so different." As the kids opened the bag and shared the food quietly among themselves, Luca sat down beside them on the concrete. The streetlight flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. It was a moment of unexpected peace. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel entirely alone. "Where are you from?" Luca asked after a while. "Bulgaria," Anika replied. "We came here hoping for a better life." My husband passed away last year. We lost everything after that. I've been trying to hold on ever since. Luca's heart ached. What was his name? Petr Ivanov, she said, a tremor in her voice. He was a mechanic. A good man. Kind. Luca nearly dropped the cup of milk in his hand. Petr? Wait. I knew him. We worked together, back when I first got to the States. He used to bring in pictures of the kids. He was always talking about how he wanted to save enough to open his own garage. Anika's eyes widened. You're Luca from Naples? He nodded slowly, stunned. He mentioned me? Anika let out a shaky breath. All the time. He said you were like a brother to him when he had no one here. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind blew gently, and in the silence, a strange warmth settled over the group, like the memory of Petr had returned to pull them together, even across time and loss. Luca looked at the kids, now calmer, full for the first time in days. He thought of Matteo. Of how this world was filled with unexpected connections. And then a thought struck him. Anika, what if we helped each other? He asked. I don't have much, but I can't let you sleep out here with your kids. I have a couch, extra blankets. Maybe just for the night. Until we figure something out. Anika hesitated. Are you sure? Luca nodded. Your husband helped me once. Let me return the favor. What started as a moment of desperation had become something else, something neither of them had expected. But just as Luca stood up to lead them toward his car, a sleek black SUV pulled into the parking lot. A man in a suit stepped out, scanning the area until his eyes landed on Anika. Her face went pale. No, she whispered, grabbing her children. Not him. Not now. Luca's pulse quickened. Who is that? Anika's voice was barely audible. My brother-in-law. He's been trying to take the kids. He says I'm unfit. Luca stepped forward, placing himself between her and the man. He didn't know what was about to happen, but something told him the real battle had only just begun. Luca instinctively moved in front of Anika and the children, standing firm even though his heart was pounding. The man walking toward them was tall, clean-shaven, and carried himself like someone used to being obeyed. His suit was expensive, and his shoes didn't belong on cracked pavement. As he approached, he didn't even glance at Luca, his cold eyes locked straight on Anika. Anika, the man said calmly, though his voice held the kind of tension that made the air around him feel heavier. I've been looking for you. You didn't return my calls. Anika tightened her arms around Mila and Sasha, pushing Ilya slightly behind her. I told you I don't want your help, Victor. We're fine. Victor's eyes flicked briefly to the children before settling back on her. You're not fine. You're begging outside grocery stores. You don't have a job or a place to live. That's not fine, it's unstable, and you know the court will see it that way too. Luca looked between them, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. What is he talking about? Anika shook her head, her voice cracking. He's trying to take them. He wants custody of the kids. He says it's to protect them, but it's about control. It always has been. Victor finally turned to Luca, offering a stiff nod. I'm their uncle. Their father, my brother, passed away last year. Since then, Anika has been moving from shelter to shelter, refusing support from our family. The children deserve stability, not this, uncertainty. "They're not yours," Anika said, louder now. "Petter wouldn't want them anywhere near you." The weight of her words hung in the air. Luca didn't know all the details, but the look on Anika's face was enough to tell him that this wasn't a simple family disagreement. It ran deeper, full of old wounds and buried resentments. Victor's tone shifted slightly, now more rehearsed. "Anika, I've already filed the paperwork. The hearing is in 2 weeks. If a social worker sees this," he gestured to the parking lot, to the huddled children and grocery bag, "they'll take one look and agree with me." Luca stepped forward. "She's not alone. She's staying with me. She and the kids have a safe place. If the court wants proof, they'll have it." Victor raised an eyebrow, sizing Luca up like he didn't expect much resistance. "And who are you?" "I'm someone who actually knew Petter. He trusted me. And if he were here, I don't think he'd stand on your side of this." Victor said nothing. He just studied Luca for a long moment, then turned back to Anika. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "They need more than love, Anika. They need structure. A future." With that, he turned and walked back to his SUV, starting the engine without another word. The sleek vehicle disappeared into the night, but the tension he brought with him lingered long after. Anika let out a long, shaky breath. Her hands were trembling as she tried to compose herself. Luca guided her and the children toward his car. Once they were inside and headed back toward his apartment, the silence between them was filled with unspoken questions. At a red light, Luca finally broke the quiet. "Is he really serious about taking them?" Anika nodded slowly. "He has money. Lawyers. Connections. Everything I don't. He says I'm unfit because I can't provide a home. But I've done everything I can to keep them safe." Luca glanced at the kids in the rearview mirror. Mila had fallen asleep, curled against Sasha. Ilya was looking out the window, quiet and distant. "Why doesn't he just help you?" Luca asked. "Why take them away?" Anika's jaw clenched. "Because he never agreed with Petter marrying me. He thought I was beneath their family. And after Petter died, he saw his chance. He thinks I'm weak. That I'll give up." "But you're not weak," Luca said, pulling into the small lot beside his building. "You're still standing. That says everything." They carried the sleeping children upstairs together. Luca's place was small, but it was warm, and for now, it was enough. He made space in the living room, setting up extra blankets and cushions. Anika helped, silently tucking the kids in. For the first time in days, they had a roof over their heads and full stomachs. Later, over tea in the kitchen, Anika opened up more. She told Luca about her life before Petter's death, the good years, when they dreamed of opening a small cafe together. He'd taught her how to make strong Bulgarian coffee, and she taught him how to slow down and enjoy it. She smiled when she remembered how proud he was of their children. He'd sing to them in the garage while working on cars, she said. His voice was terrible, but they'd laugh and clap like he was a star. Luca listened closely. It reminded him of how he used to read old Italian fairy tales to Matteo when he was little, just to make him smile through the roughest days. Stories had a way of making pain feel lighter. But when Anika got quiet again, staring into her cup, he knew the weight hadn't lifted. "I can't lose them," she whispered. "I don't have much, but they're my world." "You won't," Luca said gently. "We'll figure something out." He didn't know how yet. But something about this woman's strength stirred something in him. He'd once believed life could still surprise you in the best ways. Maybe it still could. That night, while the city hummed softly beyond the apartment windows, Luca sat awake with a notebook open in front of him. He wrote down everything he remembered about Petter, about their time working together. He listed names, dates, even silly jokes they used to share. Somewhere in these memories, maybe there was something that could help. He knew one thing for sure. The system might be stacked against people like Anika. Like him. But there was more to family than paperwork. More to love than a bank account. In the next room, Anika lay beside her children, eyes wide open. Sleep wouldn't come easily tonight. But knowing she wasn't alone gave her a sliver of peace. Still, Victor was out there. And he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, but both of them had decided one thing. They were going to fight. Together. And neither of them would back down. By the time the morning sun slid through the blinds of Luca's modest apartment, the heaviness from the night before still hung in the air. The kids were already up, huddled together on the couch watching cartoons with the volume turned low. Anika sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee Luca had made. Her eyes were tired, but there was a quiet determination in her expression, something that hadn't been there the day before. Luca placed a notebook down in front of her. I started writing everything I know about Petter. I figured if there's ever a hearing, it might help you to show how strong your connection is. Who he really was. What he wanted for you and the kids. Anika flipped through the pages, running her fingers over Luca's messy handwriting. Her voice was soft. Thank you. I didn't expect all this. From anyone. Luca shrugged. You didn't have to. Sometimes the right people just show up. But even as they shared that brief moment of peace, neither of them could ignore the ticking clock. Victor had money and power, and more importantly, time. Every passing day brought them closer to the court hearing he had scheduled. And with no job, no legal representation, and no stable housing of her own, Anika's case looked fragile at best. Later that afternoon, Luca drove Anika to a local legal aid office. The line outside wrapped around the block. Other families, mostly mothers, stood clutching folders of paperwork, tired kids leaning on their legs, hoping for a few minutes of free advice. When they finally got to the front, the woman at the desk took one look at the custody documents Victor had filed and sighed. This case isn't simple, she said. He's listed as next of kin, and he's filed in a court that leans heavily toward traditional family structures. Judges there, well, they don't always see things from a mother's point of view unless everything is in order. Anika's jaw tightened. But I'm their mother. I've raised them since birth. He never even came to the hospital when Mila was born. The woman's tone softened. I'm not saying you won't win. But you'll need character witnesses. Proof of stability. Anything that shows you can provide not just love, but structure too. On the ride back home, Anika stared out the window, her thoughts spinning. I need a job. Something official. Even part-time. Just to show I'm not standing still. Luca glanced at her, then back at the road. You sure? That's a lot, especially with everything else going on. I don't have a choice, she replied. I can't lose them. So, over the next few days, Anika started applying everywhere. Cafes, cleaning services, even the bakery down the street. Rejections came quickly. Most didn't want someone without a current address. A few places offered under-the-table pay, which wouldn't help her in court. Still, she didn't stop trying. Meanwhile, Luca worked extra shifts at the auto shop, taking on jobs others avoided just to make ends meet. He brought home leftover food from the diner next door. He helped Sasha with his schoolwork and taught Ilya how to change a tire in the parking lot. The apartment was noisy and cramped, but it had slowly become something that resembled a family. But the closer they got to the court date, the more Luca noticed Anika drifting. She'd stare off sometimes, eyes unfocused, lost in thoughts she didn't share. One night, when the kids were asleep and the TV was playing quietly in the background, Luca finally asked, "What's going on? You've been somewhere else all day." Anika hesitated before speaking. "There's something I haven't told you. About Victor." Luca leaned forward, nodding for her to go on. "He wasn't just Peter's brother. When Peter and I first started dating, Victor, he didn't like it. He used to say I was just chasing a better life, trying to marry into something I didn't deserve. And after Peter died, he offered to pay me off, to leave the country, to disappear. When I refused, he started showing up everywhere. At the daycare, outside the shelter. Watching." Luca's stomach twisted. "Why didn't you report it?" "Because he's careful. Smart. He doesn't threaten, he makes suggestions. And I didn't have proof. Just the feeling that I was always being watched. Now everything made more sense. Victor wasn't just fighting for custody, he was trying to erase her, using the law as a tool to control what he couldn't bully directly." Later that week, another wrinkle emerged. Luca got a call from Matteo's school. His son had gotten into a fight with another boy. When Luca arrived, Matteo sat in the principal's office, arms crossed, lip bruised. "I didn't start it," he muttered. "He was talking about you. Said you were living with some woman with a bunch of kids. That you were a loser." Luca's heart broke a little hearing that. "You know none of that matters, right? We're doing the right thing." "I know," Matteo replied, quieter now. "But sometimes I wish things were easier." Luca did too. But he also knew that some fights were worth it. Meanwhile, Anika finally landed a job, weekend shifts at a small bookstore a few blocks away. The pay wasn't much, but the owner agreed to provide a written letter confirming her employment. It wasn't a golden ticket, but it was something. As they gathered the last bits of evidence for the hearing, letters from teachers, a statement from Luca's landlord confirming Anika and the kids were staying there, Luca still worried it wouldn't be enough. Victor had shown up again, this time sending an expensive lawyer to their door with a thick envelope full of court documents and friendly advice about how expensive it could get if they pushed too hard. But Luca didn't back down. "Tell your client," he said firmly, "we're not afraid of him." And that was the truth. They were exhausted, underpaid, overwhelmed. But they weren't afraid. What neither of them knew, though, was that Victor had one more card up his sleeve. 3 days before the court date, Luca received a letter in the mail. It was addressed to him, but inside, it was a background check. His own. And it was clean, except for one thing. A sealed incident from 7 years ago. A fight outside a bar. Charges dropped. No conviction. But it was there. A shadow of the past. And it had been attached to a note, written in Victor's precise handwriting. "You're not as clean as you pretend to be. Stay out of it. Or I'll make sure the judge sees this." Luca stared at the paper, hands trembling. He hadn't even thought about that night in years. But now, it could be used to destroy everything they'd built. He looked toward the room where Anika was reading to the kids. Her voice was soft, and the children were laughing, the kind of sound that made everything else fade away for just a moment. Luca folded the letter slowly and slid it into the drawer. He didn't know what Victor was planning next, but he wasn't going anywhere. Because sometimes, the people who have the least to give, end up giving the most. Luca barely slept the night he found the letter. The shadows in the room seemed heavier, like they carried all the weight he was trying to hide. He kept staring at the drawer where he'd tucked the envelope, as if it might crawl out and ruin everything on its own. The threat wasn't just legal, it was personal. Victor knew exactly where to hit, and he'd waited until the moment they were closest to hope before pulling the trigger. The next morning, Luca acted like everything was normal. He made breakfast, helped Sasha zip his hoodie, even joked with Ilya about his crooked shoelaces. But behind his eyes, something had changed. He was scanning everything, faces in the street, strangers outside the bookstore. Paranoia had crept in, and it wasn't leaving. Anika noticed right away. "What's wrong?" she asked, while folding laundry in the corner of the living room. He hesitated. "Nothing. Just tired." "You're lying," she said quietly, not unkindly. "Is it something about the hearing?" He shook his head and forced a smile. "We've come too far to panic now." But later that day, as Luca picked up Matteo from school, something made his heart stop. Parked across the street was a dark sedan with tinted windows. Luca slowed his steps, pretending not to look directly at it. He knew that car. It was the same one that had followed him weeks ago when he'd taken the kids to the park. Back then, he'd brushed it off. Now he couldn't. He and Matteo walked in silence for a bit before the boy spoke up. "Dad, that car's been there a lot lately. Even when you're not around." Luca's jaw clenched. "Where did you see it?" "By the library. Once at the gas station. The guy inside, he just watches." That night, Luca made up his mind. He couldn't keep Anika in the dark. Once the kids were asleep, he sat her down and showed her the letter. Her face turned pale as she read Victor's words. "He's trying to break us," she whispered. "I know," Luca replied. "And he's not going to stop." "But what if he shows this to the judge?" she asked. "Even if it was years ago, even if you didn't do anything wrong, he'll twist it." Luca didn't answer right away. "Then we fight harder. We show them the truth. All of it." Anika nodded slowly, but her hands trembled. "I'm scared, Luca. I don't know how much more of this I can take." He reached across the table and held her hand. "You're stronger than you think. You've made it this far without breaking." In the days leading up to the hearing, things moved faster than either of them could handle. A child services worker showed up for a surprise home visit. Luckily, the apartment was clean, the kids were fed, and Anika had just gotten back from her shift. But the questions were invasive: what they ate, how the kids slept, whether Anika had a history of substance abuse. She answered every one, her voice calm but eyes hard. Victor's lawyer also sent new paperwork, this time with a glowing letter from a private school, stating he had already arranged enrollment for Mila, Ilya, and Sasha, should custody be granted. On paper, it looked perfect. Stable income, prestigious schooling, a house with bedrooms for each child. But Luca knew better. So did Anika. It wasn't about love. It was about power. Then came the knock they hadn't expected. It was Katia, Peter's mother. Anika hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. She stood in the hallway, her expression unreadable. "I heard what Victor's doing," she said flatly. "He told me you were unstable. That you were using the children to climb into someone else's life." Anika tensed. "And you believe him?" Katia looked down. "I don't know what to believe anymore. But I do know my son loved you. And I remember how you held Mila the first time. You didn't let anyone else touch her for hours. You were terrified and brave all at once." Tears welled up in Anika's eyes, but she blinked them away. Katia sighed. "If it helps. I'll testify. I'll tell them what I know. That Victor's only ever cared about his name, not family." Anika stood there, stunned. She never thought she'd hear those words. And just like that, they had something Victor didn't expect. A voice from within his own bloodline. The night before the hearing, the apartment was quiet. The kids had fallen asleep early. Luca and Anika sat on the balcony, the cold night air wrapping around them. "What if it doesn't go our way?" she asked. "Then we keep fighting," he said. "But I believe it will. Because you've done everything right. Because they belong with you." She nodded, then leaned her head on his shoulder. "You've saved us, Luca. Even when you didn't have much left yourself." He didn't respond, but his hand gently found hers. For the first time in weeks, they sat in silence without fear. But the peace didn't last. At sunrise, just hours before the hearing, Luca's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Just 2 lines. "You were warned. Now watch everything fall apart." Attached was a blurry photo of Luca and Matteo in front of their building, taken the day before. The angle, the timing, someone had been watching up close. Luca's blood went cold. Victor wasn't done. He wasn't just playing dirty, he was threatening their safety. He looked at Anika, still asleep on the couch with Mila curled in her arms. He had to make a decision. Fast. Go to court and fight? Or walk away, and keep them safe? Either way, the battle was no longer just about custody. It was about survival. Luca stared at the message for a long time, his thumb trembling just above the screen. The picture, the angle, the clarity, meant that someone had been standing no more than 20 feet from his building. Watching him. Watching Matteo. A knot twisted deep in his stomach. This wasn't just legal intimidation anymore. This was personal. Dangerous. He quietly walked to the window and looked out into the street. Everything looked the same, familiar cars, the same bakery opening its shutters, a man walking his dog. But it all felt different now, like the whole neighborhood had been peeled back to show its hidden layers. Someone out there was working with Victor, and they were close. Too close. Anika stirred on the couch, shifting under the blanket. Luca didn't wake her. He needed time to think. Every instinct screamed at him to get the kids, get her, and disappear. But where would they go? What would running solve? And would Victor stop, even then? That morning, instead of going straight to the courthouse, Luca made a detour. He met his friend Rami, a journalist who owed him a favor. They sat in a quiet corner of a rundown coffee shop near the train station. Luca slid the phone across the table, showing the message and photo. "This is beyond family court now," Luca said. "He's using threats. Surveillance. I need help documenting everything. I need a paper trail." Rami studied the message, his face growing serious. "You think he hired someone?" "I know he did. And if anything happens, I need people to know where to look." Rami nodded, then pulled out a tiny voice recorder and slid it across the table. "Start from the beginning. Everything." Meanwhile, Anika had taken the kids to her friend Zoya's apartment, just in case. She didn't tell them much, only that they were visiting for a bit while she and Luca handled something important. The kids, sensing the tension, didn't ask questions. But Mila clung tighter than usual, and Sasha kept checking the window like he was waiting for someone to come knock. Back in court, the tension was unbearable. Victor sat on one side with his high-powered lawyer, smug and polished. Luca and Anika sat on the other, hands clasped under the table. They'd submitted Katia's written statement, but she hadn't shown up. Something felt off. The judge, a sharp woman named Judge Reiner, looked over her glasses. "We've reviewed statements from both parties," she said, her tone neutral but firm. "However, before we proceed with testimony, we've received a new piece of evidence submitted anonymously this morning." Anika's breath caught. Luca looked at her, confused. Judge Reiner continued. "It's a video. A recording from 5 years ago, taken at a private party." Luca's heart stopped. The screen in the courtroom lit up. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. It showed Luca, years younger, surrounded by loud voices, alcohol, people laughing and shouting. He wasn't doing anything illegal, but it didn't look good. The camera angle made it seem like he was arguing with someone, aggressive. The audio had been conveniently cut, replaced by ominous silence. Victor's lawyer stood. "This shows the environment Mr. Moretti once existed in, unfit for raising children." Luca stood too, voice steady. "That's from years ago. I was in recovery months after that. I haven't touched a drink in years. I've raised my son alone, worked 2 jobs, volunteered at his school." Judge Reiner held up a hand. "Sit down, both of you. This isn't a trial of character. It's about the safety and well-being of the children." But the damage had been done. Anika could feel it. The mood in the room shifted. Victor had timed the release perfectly, just enough to cast doubt, not enough for legal dismissal. They left court shaken. On the steps, Luca buried his face in his hands. "He's not stopping. He's never going to stop." Anika touched his shoulder. "He's trying to exhaust us. Make us doubt ourselves. But we're still standing, Luca." Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. But it wasn't a threat. It was a short video. This time, showing Victor, in a bar, drunk and yelling at someone on the phone. The date stamp? 3 weeks ago. Beneath the video, one sentence, "You're not alone. Don't give up." Anika showed it to Luca, her hands shaking. "Who sent this?" "I don't know," he said. "But it's someone watching him too." A second plot had begun to unravel. Victor wasn't as untouchable as he thought. Someone from his own world, someone with access, was feeding information in secret. But who? And why? That night, Anika got a call from Katia. She was in tears. "I was followed," she said. After I gave that letter to your lawyer, someone came to my house. They warned me not to testify. Anika's heart dropped. Are you okay? I'm fine now, but I can't do this in court. I'm sorry. When Anika hung up, Luca already knew what had happened. Victor had silenced her too. But they had the bar video now. They had something real. Still, it meant they were walking into the final hearing without a key witness, with old skeletons dragged into the light, and anonymous help that could disappear as easily as it appeared. And as they sat quietly in the kitchen that night, the lights off, the city humming beyond the windows, Anika whispered the question they were both afraid to say out loud. What if Victor wins? Luca didn't have an answer. But outside, parked once again across the street, the dark sedan sat silently. Watching. Waiting. Whatever was coming next, they'd need more than truth to survive it. The courtroom was tense. The final hearing had arrived, and the air felt thicker than usual, like everyone was waiting for something to explode. Luca sat beside Anika, gripping a folder tightly in his lap. Matteo wasn't there. Anika had arranged for the kids to stay safely with Zoya. This day was too unpredictable. Too dangerous. Victor walked in with his usual arrogance, a smirk barely hidden on his face. His suit was flawless, and so was the performance he'd prepared. His lawyer was ready to shred through Luca's credibility with the footage from the past, while Victor planned to present himself as the reformed, financially stable, emotionally responsible father figure. All lies, wrapped in charm. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Once seated again, the proceedings began. Witnesses gave statements. Victor's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of Luca as unstable, reckless in his past, and unprepared to take on the role of guardian for anyone outside of his biological son. He used carefully curated words: questionable background, volatile environment, unpredictable partner. Anika was barely referenced by name, always referred to as the woman or the new influence. Then it was Luca's turn. His lawyer stood and calmly laid out years of evidence: Matteo's school reports, letters from teachers, proof of stable employment, even photographs of family moments. But when it came to Victor's manipulation, the threats, the shadow games, none of it had hard proof that could stand on its own in court. Until Rami walked in. Heads turned as he strode into the courtroom and handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff. The judge raised an eyebrow. "I understand this is irregular, Your Honor," Luca's lawyer said. "But new evidence has come to light, evidence that directly speaks to the safety of the children involved." The judge allowed it. The room fell quiet as a new video played on the screen. It was Victor. Not in a bar this time. He was in a car, alone, yelling into a phone. The conversation was clear now. "You think I care about her kids?" he snapped. "I just want her out of my life. And that kid she's dragging around too. She used to listen, now she's defiant. And that broke ex of hers? He's nothing. I'll crush him in court." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The judge's face hardened. Victor turned pale. For once, he was speechless. The judge called for a short recess, but no one was fooled. Everything had changed in a single moment. Victor's mask had fallen, and everyone had seen what was underneath. Luca let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Anika sat still, stunned. She had won. They had won. But just as they stepped outside the courthouse, the final twist came. A woman waited on the sidewalk. blonde, with sharp features and a cold confidence. She approached them, flashing a badge too quickly to read. "I need a word," she said quietly. They stepped aside, out of earshot from the crowd. "My name is Agent Ellis," she began. "We've been building a case on Viktor Volkov for some time. You weren't supposed to know. We've monitored his dealings, money laundering, coercion, even ties to trafficking networks." Luca froze. "You're telling me we were in the middle of a federal investigation?" "Unwittingly, yes," she said. "But your court battle gave us leverage. That video that surfaced today, it didn't come from a friend. It came from us. We knew Viktor would slip up if pushed far enough. And he did." Anika's voice cracked. "You used my family to trap him?" "We protected you," Ellis said. "But we needed to let him feel untouchable. Your courage, your persistence, that's what helped us close the net." Luca looked at Anika. She looked back, stunned, processing everything. "So, what now?" he asked. "Now?" Ellis tucked her badge away. "Now we bring him down fully. And you go home and raise those kids." They watched as Viktor was quietly approached by two men in dark suits. He didn't even fight. He just lowered his head, defeated, and disappeared into the car waiting for him. That evening, Luca, Anika, and the kids sat around the dinner table. The meal was simple: pasta, salad, fresh bread. Nothing fancy. But it felt like a feast. The laughter of the kids echoed through the small apartment, louder than it had in months. Anika rested her head on Luca's shoulder, and he kissed the top of her hair. "You know," he said softly, "I thought I was rescuing you. But you rescued me too." She smiled without looking up. "We rescued each other." Outside the window, the city buzzed like usual. But in that little apartment, it was calm. Peaceful. Whole. The fight had been brutal. The truth had been buried. But in the end, love had risen, louder than power, louder than fear. And even though the scars would remain, so would the strength they'd built, together. The days that followed moved slowly, as if time itself had paused to let everyone breathe again. After Viktor's arrest, a heavy weight lifted off the family, but not without leaving behind echoes of what they'd been through. The court case was over, but the emotional fallout, especially for the kids, needed time and patience. Anika made it her mission to create new routines for Mila, Sasha, and Nico. They started going to therapy once a week, guided by a soft-spoken counselor who encouraged the kids to talk through their fears instead of burying them. Sasha, the quiet one, was the first to open up. He spoke about the nights he would hear his mom crying behind closed doors, how he'd pretend to sleep so she wouldn't feel worse. Mila followed a week later, sharing drawings she'd made, some dark, some hopeful, each telling stories she hadn't found the words for yet. Nico, the youngest, took the longest. But one night, while eating ice cream on the sofa with Luca, he whispered, "Are you going to stay?" And when Luca nodded, Nico simply leaned his head on his arm. Luca and Anika took turns cooking, cleaning, and helping with homework. Their lives were no longer about just surviving. They were building something. Slowly, steadily, with love in the little things. A handwritten note in a lunchbox, a bedtime story read out loud even when everyone was tired, laughter in the hallway during Saturday chores. Rami, the loyal friend who risked his job to help, wasn't forgotten. One evening, Luca brought over a homemade dinner as thanks, setting it down on Rami's table with a nod. You didn't have to do what you did, Luca said. But you did. And we're standing because of it. Rami shrugged, smiling. You'd have done the same for me. Meanwhile, Luca's construction job took a new turn. Word of his dedication, and his story, had made its way to a local nonprofit that renovated homes for families in need. They offered him a supervisory role. It wasn't just a pay bump. It was a chance to lead, to build homes for others, just like he had for his own family. It felt right. He accepted it without hesitation. One Saturday, as autumn leaves fell around the city, the family stood together on the front steps of a new apartment, theirs. With help from the nonprofit and the local community, they'd moved out of their cramped space into something brighter, bigger. It had 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, and the smell of fresh paint that made Anika tear up the moment she stepped inside. "This is yours," Luca told the kids as they ran from room to room. "All of it." Anika walked through slowly, her hand brushing the wall like she couldn't believe it was real. "It feels like a dream," she whispered. "It's not," Luca said gently. "It's just what we deserved all along." At school, the kids started to flourish. Mila joined the student council and helped start a lunch-sharing program so no one had to eat alone. Sasha joined the soccer team and surprised everyone, especially himself, with how fast he ran. Nico, who once clung to his mother's side, walked into kindergarten smiling, waving goodbye with confidence. As for Anika, she decided to go back to school part-time, working toward a degree in early childhood education. It had always been a dream she pushed aside while raising her kids and escaping her past. But now, with support, she found the courage to chase it again. Life wasn't perfect. There were still hard days. Bills to pay. Homework tantrums. Tired nights. But through it all, there was love, deep, earned love that came from choosing one another over and over again. One night, months after the trial, they all sat around the dinner table. The kids had just finished telling stories from their day. Nico spilled juice on his drawing, Sasha got picked as team captain, and Mila got a compliment from her teacher. It was chaotic and loud, but beautiful in its own way. Luca stood and raised his glass of water. "I just want to say something," he said, his voice soft. Everyone looked up. "I know we've all been through a lot. There were times I didn't think we'd make it through. But I've never believed in anything more than I believe in this family. We're not here because life was easy, we're here because we didn't give up. Because love wins, even when the world feels against you." Anika smiled, tears forming but not falling. She reached across the table, taking his hand. Mila grinned. "Does this mean we can have cake now?" Everyone laughed. As the night wore on, the city outside kept moving, cars passing, lights flickering, but inside that little home, time stood still in the best way. The warmth, the laughter, the safety, it was all earned. And it was theirs. Later that night, as Luca stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee, he looked out into the quiet street. He thought about where he had started, sleeping in a cold apartment, unsure if he could provide for Matteo. He thought about meeting Anika, about that moment in the grocery store when she had asked for help not with words, but with her eyes. He remembered how her kids had looked at him like they weren't sure if he was a stranger or a savior. And now, months later, he wasn't either. He was just Dad. To all of them. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Anika joined him, pulling her sweater tighter around her shoulders. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. You ever think about how different things could have been? She asked quietly. Yeah, he said. Every day. And would you change any of it? He looked at her, at the warm glow from the house, at the shadows of 3 kids laughing through the curtains. Not a thing. And in that simple silence, the story came to a close, not with a perfect ending, but with a true one. A story of hardship, second chances, and unexpected family. A reminder that kindness still matters, that hope can rise from the lowest places, and that sometimes, the most powerful change starts with a single moment of compassion.